Good morning, everyone. We have another great show. Welcome back to Infrastructure Week. Team Rising is here, and we also have Kevin Ring and Sarah Nelson.
But first, Senator Bernie Sanders is warning President Biden and Senator Manchin that there will be no bipartisan infrastructure deal without a reconciliation bill. The remarks from Sanders come after Biden walked back the suggestion he would only support a bipartisan bill if a larger reconciliation bill was also passed. So this is now the defining fight over the infrastructure battle. And what I think is happening is that Washington is kind of freaked out that the left made a series of demands laid out here on this show. Mm-hmm. People
Absolutely.
Can go back and look at those a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And now they're actually being met. And this hasn't happened since the 1970s.
Right.
That the left laid out a set of demands and that the establishment said, you know what? You got it. We're going to do it that way.
And they are using their power as leverage. And I think that's the key distinction, as you just said. And that's something the left has sort of been craving and crying for so long, is that when you have the power, you throw around your weight.
Right. That's what we're here for.
Use it as leverage. And Ryan and I were talking before the show started about how that $6 trillion number that Bernie Sanders wanted, so I think it's a pretty smart negotiating tactic. You throw out the $6 trillion number and then you come down. That's a win. If this bill comes in at a $4 trillion package or a $3 trillion package, as Ryan said, you're on Bernie's turf.
Right. Exactly. If you're negotiating the terms somewhere between $4 and $6 trillion, that's a huge win. And to catch people up on what they're talking about with this one reconciliation bill and this other bipartisan bill. So for a bipartisan bill, people think you need 60 votes. Maybe nobody filibusters it, maybe somebody does. But if somebody filibusters it, you need 60 votes. And so there's this $1.2 trillion package that has been negotiated by 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And all the Democrats are fine with it. But the Democrats are only fine with it if you can use the reconciliation process, which is partisan 50 votes only, to also do the things that Republicans don't want to do. Now, Rob Portman, who was one of the 5 Republicans, said on CNBC the day that the deal was struck, it's like, yes, they're going to do reconciliation. We know they're going to do reconciliation. There's nothing we can do to stop them. I asked Richard Burr, it's the same question. Does your support for this infrastructure package hinge on whether or not Democrats decide to do separately the reconciliation package? He's like, no, it depends on whether or not it's a good package. What Democrats do on their own isn't my business. There's nothing I can do to stop them. We're now having this theater where McConnell is saying, oh, this is so unfair. You can't, you made this deal over here. Now you can't also do reconciliation. Do you think he's going to be able to kind of maintain that position? I
mean, I think unfair is a ridiculous word to use in these cynical political negotiations, no matter what.
But Mitch McConnell, his number one priority is fairness in the legislative process.
He just wants good bipartisan fairness.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's a ridiculous word to throw around in this context. I do think that what is happening is going to be something this is what I always expected to happen, that something is going to blow up to the point where you're never actually going to be able to get that many Republicans on board for the original package, the main package in and of itself, let alone the reconciliation one. And then Democrats have to figure out how they can even do the reconciliation package that has infrastructure is the broadest term in our politics, and the reconciliation bill is less of an infrastructure bill and more of just like a progressive priorities package that is under the umbrella of infrastructure. Some of it legitimately you can make the argument that it is infrastructure. Other stuff, family leave policies, I don't know, you can sort of stretch the definition and get there, but it's a progressive policy bill. How you do reconciliation and maintain Manchin cinema in that bill in and of itself we're going to be in the same place where we're doing crunching the numbers and figuring out who gives and who gets, et cetera, et cetera. But the first step on this original bill, I don't think there's any way that, given the reconciliation process, I don't think there's any way that you end up getting enough Republican support for this.
We'll see, and which then requires some Republicans to filibuster a bill that people like Portman are voting for, which that would be the best of all worlds for Democrats. So, oh, great. So now you guys are filibustering a bipartisan infrastructure package. You're showing Manchin that despite all of this good work, he can get 5 Republicans, but he can't get 10. Then they take all of the things that Democrats like in that $1.2 trillion deal, they move it over to the reconciliation package.
Exactly.
And then all of Portman's things that he wanted, that Democrats were like, we don't really want that, but that's fine to get a deal. Now all of a sudden that doesn't get passed, and Manchin gets his payback on McConnell and gets to reopen the Trump tax cuts.
Yeah.
This is something, so we got this leaked audio from a conversation that he had with some billionaires recently, and he told the story of being willing to vote for the Trump tax cut. He had a bunch of things that he wanted, minor things that he wanted McConnell to put in, and he was going to make it a bipartisan thing. Would have been a big win for McConnell. McConnell came to him the day of the vote and said, Joe, we've got 50 votes. We don't need your vote, so we're good. So all of the things he wanted, tossed out the window. And so Manchin's like, well, guess what? Now it wasn't bipartisan. So now we can open it back up. Those things that I wanted, I'm pulling them back in through the window. And so now Manchin's willing to, not only is he willing to do reconciliation, this is the dirty secret, he actively wants to.
Right.
And that's why Democrats have so much leverage. And so it's not just Bernie, but let's put this Bernie tweet up. Bernie tweeted that the climate crisis is critical to infrastructure, saying, quote, we can no longer ignore the reality that climate change is causing devastating destruction in our country and around the world. We must act now. You're seeing a lot of energy on this from the left. So here's Congressman Bowman outside the White House at a Sunrise Movement rally yesterday.
They occupy our streets, they mass incarcerate us, but they leave us food insecure in transportation deserts, and our buildings and schools falling apart. Fuck them! We gotta go big and take it to another level. And this is our moment. This is the moment!
So here's Mitch McConnell's advice to Joe Biden. Don't let the Democrats hold the bipartisan bill hostage over a, quote, separate and partisan process. Trump slammed McConnell for his failure to fight for the presidency and blamed him for losing 2 senatorial seats in Georgia, which resulted in Republicans losing their Senate majority. Republicans, I think, are in a lose-lose situation here when it comes to the infrastructure negotiations because, and part of that is being in the minority. That's kind of a normal function of it when you don't have the votes.
That's how it's supposed to work, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. But I do think they're in a lose-lose situation here. Democrats have them cornered like very, very well. And I think to your point, the way the left has negotiated this and is sort of finally coming to fruition as a force of power that is listened to by the establishment is playing out here. It may all come crashing down. That is not impossible. But it does seem at this point that you can sort of hold that you can put the bad stuff from a bipartisan perspective in the reconciliation bill and create a bill that is sort of like the perfect symbol of Republicans obstructing progress. You can really create a bill that makes it difficult for them to latch on to any big thing. Like these packages, they always have things that people can latch on to and say, this is pork, this is bad, and then run ads on it, whatever. But they can, in this situation where they're doing a 2-bill package, they can really, really get that first one into a place where they put the optics of Republicans obstructing it and not voting for it in a very favorable place for them that ultimately doesn't turn out well for Republicans. Then at the same time, if they do pass a reconciliation bill that is highly partisan and ideological and filled with very transformative things, big spending, et cetera, that you might have problems selling, with those demographics in the suburbs that Democrats are sort of newly creeping into but having issues maybe holding on to, you could have a problem with the reconciliation bill.
Right. And McConnell, though, is known as this legislative genius, but Trump's not wrong about his point about Georgia. And it's got to be in the back of McConnell's mind. If McConnell could go back in time to December when Trump was calling for $2,000 checks, make the $600 into $1,400. And Democrats in Congress immediately introduced legislation that like, yeah, Trump, you want to do 2,000? Here's an extra 1,400. Let's pass it. The House passes it. And McConnell felt, you know what? I'm good. We're polling ahead in Georgia. It's Georgia.
Yeah.
We're gonna be fine. And he bottled it up and he refused to pass these $1,400 checks. And by all accounts, that was a motivating factor. And Joe Biden went down to Georgia and said, elect Warnock and Ossoff, you get these $2,000 checks. They're running ads. Elect these Democrats, you get these $2,000 checks. And voters put them in office. And McConnell is not majority leader anymore. So if he could go back and spend that money and hold on to the majority, I'm sure he would. And so now he's got to be second guessing himself a little bit. And the lack of sureness with which he's navigating this process, I suspect, is a function of that.
Yeah, right. And they're exactly. I think the Georgia example is an instructive one because that is very true. And then at the same time, the interplay between Trump and McConnell, which is very personal and has especially been personal after January 6th, that was not helpful to anybody, period, throughout the course of those elections. That was, I mean, Donald Trump was, I would say, easily as harmful to the Republicans running in that race as McConnell's issues with the checks.
Refusing to like concede defeat and then forcing Perdue and Loeffler to like get behind his claims, and like that hurt him badly in the suburbs too. It was
an incredible distraction, and those suburbs that we were just talking about that could be on the line with a reconciliation bill, it's an interesting, that's like really the place to watch, at risk of sounding ridiculous in 2024 though, and actually in 2022, because those are the places where formerly Republican strongholds, suburbs, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, that went sort of Democrat in the Trump era. And if Democrats sort of overplay their hand, and maybe it's in the sake of ideological progress, but if they overplay their hand from a partisan and sort of political perspective, that could be a big problem for them because they now have sort of grasped something that was out of reach for a long time and is politically a huge benefit to them. That's where the reconciliation bill is going to get interesting.
On McConnell's suggestion, that he was going to blow this whole process up over partisanship, because he finds it to be so unfair. I wanted to play one of my favorite clips of all time from Capitol Hill. Can we pull up the Barney Frank clip? Now, I'll give you a little background first before we play it. So this is in 2008. The House Republicans had voted down the bailout of Wall Street after Nancy Pelosi had gone on the floor and blamed them and their deregulation for blowing up the financial system. Now, they might have been right, actually. Maybe we should not have bailed out Wall Street at that time. Mm-hmm. But they ended up bailing out Wall Street a week later anyway, after the market dived and everybody warned of financial Armageddon.
And then they prosecuted Wall Street, remember that?
Oh yeah, there was definitely accountability all over the place. Right. Teresa Giudice went to jail, but nobody else.
Thank you for the Real Housewives reference. I didn't know you were a fan. This is
Joe,
good.
I was so furious that the only people to go to jail as part of the mortgage crisis were Joe and Teresa Giudice. You're kidding me. And so at a press conference, Barney Frank was asked, was it unfair? Was it mean of Nancy Pelosi to say unkind things about Republicans right before this vote, causing them to change their votes and tank the market? And here's how Barney Frank responded.
I am appalled. Frankly, that's an accusation against my Republican colleagues I would never have thought of making. Here's the story. There's a terrible crisis affecting the American economy. We have come together on a bill to alleviate the crisis. And because somebody hurt their feelings, they decide to punish the country. I mean, I would not have imputed that degree of pettiness and hypersensitivity. I mean, we also have, as the leader will tell you, who's been working with them, we don't believe they have the votes, and I think they are covering up the embarrassment of not having the votes. But think about this. Somebody hurt my feelings, so I will punish the country. I mean, that's hardly plausible. And there were 12 Republican members who were ready to stand up for the economic interests of America, but not of anybody insulting them. I'll make an offer. Give me those 12 people's names, and I will go talk uncharacteristically nicely to them. And tell them what wonderful people they are, and maybe they'll now think about the country.
Love Rahm Emanuel lurking in the background there.
Right.
But so the ability of Mitch McConnell, I think, to come out and say, I would have done this bipartisan package, except I didn't like that they were also going to do a reconciliation package around child tax credits and other stuff. I don't think it stands up. I don't think that works.
No, it's not a politically good position to be in at all. And I don't think Republicans even think that it works. I mean, maybe some of them right now are deluded into thinking that they can, say that we're the bulwark between this and a partisan, grab bag. I think maybe some of them are delusional enough to think about that. But these policies are relatively popular ones. They might be able to talk about the price tag. They might be able to to talk about the progressive agenda and socialism, et cetera, but I think it's a much better messaging exercise for Democrats, and that is such a fantastic deep cut, because it's a really good example of how Democrats are going to be able to spin this situation if Republicans are obstructing. Like, listen, I think it's perfectly fair for Republicans not to vote for a package that guarantees an ushering in of the progressive agenda. I think it's a perfectly fair decision, but Democrats have them in a really difficult place on the first infrastructure bill, which will be broadly popular. People will really want it. It'll be easily branded for Democrats, and so I don't know what Republicans are going to do. I just have a hard time believing that they're going to want the blood on their hands of the reconciliation bill when it comes time for primaries.
Yeah, and as Democrats learned with Merrick Garland, with Neil Gorsuch in the filibuster, with the Trump tax cuts and reconciliation, if you're arguing process, you're losing.
Yes.
Nobody cares. Once you're using the word reconciliation, you're down to single digits numbers of people who have any idea what you're talking about. Nobody cares about process.
No. And they shouldn't.
They don't. And they shouldn't. They should care what the Congress actually does.
Yeah, they should care what's actually happening.
Up next, we'll tell you what's on our radars.